My name is Margaret Wells. I'm 68 years old. And last winter, my own daughter-in-law, a bank employee, mocked me in front of a lobby full of people for asking to withdraw $50. She smiled like I was a joke. And for a moment, I almost believed her. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't just an old woman with a savings account. Within hours, I would walk back into that same bank and make a withdrawal so large it froze their entire system, ended her career, and changed the way my family would look at me forever. Have you ever been humiliated so deeply that it woke something fierce and quiet inside you? Stay with me. Because this isn't a story about money. It's about the day I finally withdrew my dignity. It was one of those cold Ohio mornings when the air felt sharper than usual. The kind that makes your hands ache just holding a purse strap. I pulled into the parking lot of Riverdale Savings and Trust, a place I had gone to for years without anyone remembering my name. I wasn't there for much. Just $50 in cash. My granddaughter Lily was turning 10 this weekend, and I wanted to buy her a small gift. Something personal. Maybe a handmade bracelet from the shop down on Main Street. It wasn't about the money. It was about showing up, the way I always tried to. Inside, the bank was warm and sterile. The scent of coffee and floor polish mixed in the air. I stood in line behind a man in a suit, talking loudly on his phone, and a young mother balancing a baby on her hip. My hands trembled slightly. Not from age, but from the cold that hadn't left them yet. When it was finally my turn, I stepped forward, setting my checkbook and ID on the counter. That's when I heard her voice behind me. Well, look who decided to join the living. Amanda said. I froze for half a second before turning. She stood behind the manager's desk, arms crossed, her perfect hair in place, lips painted in that confident shade of red she always wore to family dinners. My daughter-in-law, Amanda Wells, 35. Ambitious. Always polished, like the women you see in bank commercials. Good morning, I said softly. She smiled in that way that wasn't really a smile. What brings you here? Margaret. I hated when she used my full name like that. No warmth. No respect. Just distance. I need to withdraw $50. I said. 50, she repeated, raising her eyebrows as if I'd just told her I needed a loan for a yacht. You mean 5-0, not 5,000. A few people in line glanced over. I nodded. Yes. Just 50. Amanda tilted her head, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. Oh, honey. At your age. Shouldn't Daniel be handling your accounts? You know how confusing all this can get with the screens and numbers. Someone behind me chuckled. I felt the heat rise up my neck. The young teller looked uncomfortable. Avoiding my eyes. I can manage, I said quietly. Amanda stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to pretend she cared, but loud enough for everyone around to hear. Maybe you should save your pennies. Old lady. Things are getting expensive out there. The words hit me like a slap. There was a murmur of laughter from a few customers. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears. For a moment, I wasn't 68. I was a little girl again, standing in front of my father while he laughed at something I'd said, realizing too late that being right didn't matter when people had already decided you were small. I reached for the cash the teller had counted out. My fingers shook. Not from fear but from humiliation. I stuffed the bills into my purse. Thank you, I said to the teller. Not to Amanda. Amanda folded her arms. Anytime. Margaret. Tell Daniel, I said hi. And maybe remind him about that credit card bill. I turned away before she could see my eyes watering. The floor seemed louder under my shoes. The air heavier. I could feel everyone watching. Pretending not to. My heart ached. Not from what she said, but from the fact that no one thought it was wrong. Outside, the wind hit my face hard. I took a deep breath, letting the cold sting me awake. The parking lot glimmered with patches of melting frost. For a second, I thought about going back inside, saying something, anything to defend myself. But I didn't. That's not who I am. I've spent most of my life believing that silence can be stronger than shouting. I sat in my car, the heater humming softly. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked tired, older than I remembered. The lines around my mouth had deepened. Not from smiling, but from holding things in. I pulled out the $50 bill, smoothing the edges. It wasn't just paper. It was proof that I still had the right to decide something for myself, no matter how small. As I drove home, the world outside seemed oddly quiet. I passed the bakery where Harold and I used to stop for cinnamon rolls every Sunday. He would have known what to say to Amanda. He always did. He had that calm authority that made people listen without raising his voice. I missed that steadiness. Since he passed, the world had gotten louder, ruder, colder. At the red light, I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter. $50. It was nothing compared to what Harold and I had built over the years. Yet somehow, it had become a symbol of everything I'd lost since he died. Respect, autonomy, dignity. By the time I reached my driveway, my anger had cooled into something sharper. Quieter. I sat there for a long time, watching the winter sun flicker through the bare trees. Somewhere, deep inside, something shifted. Not rage, not even sadness. Just a kind of weary clarity. People like Amanda thought silence meant weakness. They didn't understand that silence could also mean patience. And patience, when you've lived long enough, can be the sharpest weapon of all. When I finally stepped out of the car, the wind had died down. I clutched my purse, feeling the weight of that $50 bill like a secret waiting to be used. Inside the house, everything was still. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the framed photo of Harold smiling on the mantel. I looked at his picture and whispered, "They forgot, didn't they?" And for the first time in years, I felt the faintest spark of something I hadn't felt since he was alive. Not hope exactly, more like purpose. I stood in the hallway for a while after that quiet moment in the living room, the one where the house finally felt like it belonged to me again. The furnace clicked on, a low, steady breath through the vents, and I let the warmth rise around my ankles before I moved. Habit took me to the kitchen. I put the kettle on, wiped a clean circle on the window with the side of my hand, and watched a thin sheet of frost cling to the outside glass. It was an ordinary Ohio afternoon. Ordinary, right up until the part of me that had gone still began to wake up. I have lived most of my life inside other people's noise. At 22, I was the quiet girl from Lafayette County who liked numbers more than chatter. In Columbus, I became the woman in the back office who could balance a ledger down to the penny and find a missing cent buried inside a sloppy spreadsheet. People brought me problems, and I sent them away calmer than they arrived. That was my talent. Not charm. Not speeches. Certainty. I married certainty when I married Harold. Harold liked the big picture. He talked about risk the way other men talked about weather. He would say, risk is never the villain. The lie you tell yourself about it is. He opened a small investment trust in 2010. Nothing grand. Nothing that would make a headline. He put my name on the papers as a partner because he said love is paperwork as much as it is feelings. We did not have a fancy office. There was a desk in our den and an old metal file cabinet that stuck on cold mornings. He managed clients who liked his calm voice and clean explanations. And I checked every figure he sent out into the world. We were a team in the way that only two people who trust each other can be. When he got sick in 2012, the house sounded wrong. Every clock ticked louder. He asked me to bring the wooden box from the top shelf of our closet. Inside was a small brass key and a folded note. The paper soft from being handled. Use it when they forget who you are. He handed me the key, like he was handing me a lifeline and not a simple square of metal. I told him that no one would forget me. He smiled and said that sometimes they forget on purpose. He was gone 2 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon with sunlight on his face and my hand in his. After the funeral, after the casseroles and the quiet that followed the voices, I moved back to Riverdale. People were kind in the way small towns are kind. They wave from mailboxes, ask about the weather and the garden, bring you tomatoes in summer. I kept busy with church luncheons and the library book club, where half the time we talked about the lives we used to have more than the book. I paid my bills on time. I kept the brass key in the middle drawer of my dresser under a folded handkerchief. I did not want power. I wanted peace. Daniel said he would help me with the household budget. He had always been a good boy, serious and eager to be useful. He said, "Mom, let me move your utilities to auto-pay. It will make things easier for you." He called a week later and said, "Mom, I changed the credit card for your pharmacy to my account, so you do not have to worry about it." I told him that I could manage. And he said, "I know you can. This is just practical." I wanted to believe in practical. Amanda appeared with a neat folder one Sunday, the kind with colored tabs and sticky notes. She said the trust paperwork needed to be updated for compliance, and that trials of new electronic systems required fresh signatures. She smiled like a professional, and I signed the stickers she placed in front of me. It felt like filling out a school form for a field trip. More bureaucracy than consequence. I still kept the bills in a blue accordion file next to the desk in the study. It calmed me to see the order of them. In the spring of 2019, I noticed something that did not sit right. A statement from the trust reflected a change in the destination for a quarterly dividend. The total was not large in the way newspapers talk about money. But it was not small to me. There was a new account number in the notes. I remember calling Daniel and asking if the bank had changed its internal routing. He said, "Mom, they updated some systems for fraud prevention." I talked to them about consolidating distributions to simplify reporting. He sounded patient in the way people do when they believe they are being helpful to someone who has slowed down. I thanked him and hung up. That night I sat with the statement and tried to shake an unease that felt like a pebble in my shoe. There were other small things. A letter about a change to delivery preferences to electronic only that I did not recall requesting. A piece of mail redirected and arriving with a yellow forwarding mark at the top, as if it had taken a short detour without asking me first. A note from the accountant reminding me to keep my signatures consistent on tax documents, since electronic signature technology could be fussy about name variations. I brushed it aside because grief had taught me that sometimes your brain misfiles new information when your heart is busy working a different problem. I cooked. I weeded the small garden behind the house. I learned how to make peach jam from a recipe Mrs. Gable wrote out on an index card in her looping script. When the loneliness rose too high, I went for a drive down to the river and watched the water move like time itself. Steady and slow. The town carried me the way a quiet song can carry you through a long night. I kept my old check register balanced, even though no one needs one anymore. I liked the feel of the pen scratching across the paper. When numbers line up, something inside me loosens, like a muscle unclenching. The week of Daniel and Amanda's 5th anniversary, a package arrived from their new address across town. It was a framed photo of them in a restaurant. Amanda laughing, Daniel leaning in to kiss her cheek. A sticky note said, "Thank you for helping with the logistics this year. We love you, Mom." I turned the frame over and set it on the hallway table. The words felt like a reminder and a warning at the same time. If I am honest, part of me was relieved to let them handle the complexity. It is easy to confuse gratitude for an excuse to stop paying attention. I would make tea and tell myself that I deserved to rest. Then something small would poke at me. An account alert that arrived late. A message that said a security preference had been updated. In the grocery store line, I heard a woman explaining to a friend that her daughter had put all her bills online and now she never saw a statement at all. She sounded cheerful. I felt a sudden wash of dread. On Sundays I drove to Daniel and Amanda's for dinner. The table looked like a magazine spread. Polished wood and wine glasses that probably did not know the inside of a dishwasher. Amanda loved a theme. Italian night with candles. Summer grill night with matching napkins. She was always very kind in public ways. She would say, "Mom, sit in the good chair," and then later remind me that I had forgotten a detail from a story I had told. The correction sliding in like a knife so elegant you do not feel the cut until the warmth blooms. Daniel would nod along and push the conversation toward her job, her projects, her future plans. I kept bringing small gifts. A pecan pie I baked from Harold's mother's recipe. A hand-knit scarf for Lily with lilac stripes. Amanda would smile and say how sweet and set the pie at the far end of the counter. And the scarf would disappear into a closet before Lily ever saw it. It was not cruelty exactly. It was erasing. The difference is important. Cruelty bruises. Erasing makes you doubt you were ever there. The winter before Lily turned 10. Which is now. The house felt especially empty after church. I took the brass key from the dresser and held it in my palm. It had weight. More than it should. I put it back. I decided that I would not be the old woman who sat in a chair and counted the days between someone else's visits. I made a list of the week on the back of an envelope. Monday was the library. Tuesday, groceries. Wednesday, I would try a new class at the community center for strength and balance. Thursday, I would bake something for Mrs. Gable because she had slipped on her porch and scared herself even though she did not break anything. Friday, I would organize the file cabinet. When Friday came, I opened the blue file and sorted papers into neat stacks. There was a copy of an authorization form dated in late summer of 2019 with my name printed under a signature that looked like mine if you looked quickly and not at all like mine if you paused. My first instinct was to scold myself for being sloppy with a pen. Then, the second thought arrived behind it like a shadow. If I did not sign this, who did? I carried the page to the window to see it in better light. The M of Maggie was too round. Harold always teased me that my M looked like a mountain range. This M looked like a balloon. I called Daniel and asked if he remembered bringing me forms that summer. He said, "Mom, there were so many forms that year. The bank had changed vendors. It was a mess." He sounded tired. I said that one of the signatures looked off. He said, "Electronic tools sometimes generate a facsimile that prints differently and not to worry." Later, I stood at the sink, rinsing a coffee cup until the water ran cold. There is a voice that lives in the back of your mind if you are lucky enough to have survived long enough to grow it. It does not shout. It just leans forward and says, "Pay attention." By then, the days had settled into a routine between my house and theirs. Amanda texted menus. Daniel texted reminders. Lily sent me pictures of her drawings with a row of purple hearts that looked like tiny mountains. The Friday before the dinner, where everything would start to crack open. Amanda sent a message that said Italian night again. Wear something nice. I held the phone and felt the ridiculous urge to laugh. As if I had spent my whole life in ugly clothes until she arrived to teach me otherwise. I took a bath that evening and put lotion on my elbows, the way Harold used to remind me. I ironed a blouse I liked, pale blue with small pearl buttons, and hung it on the back of the bedroom door. I put the brass key back in its place and closed the drawer. The furnace sighed. The house was as quiet as I needed it to be. I went to the kitchen to set the kettle again. I let the water heat until the first thin whisper of steam rose from the spout. Sunday was coming. I would sit at their table again. I would listen. And this time, I would pay attention. Sunday arrived gray and damp. The kind of day when the sky feels too low and the air smells like wet pavement. I dressed slowly, choosing the pale blue blouse I had ironed 2 nights before, and slipped on a cardigan the color of oatmeal. Old habits die hard. I still cared about how I looked at family dinners, even when I knew my effort wouldn't be noticed. The ride to Daniel and Amanda's house took 12 minutes. Their neighborhood was one of those new developments where every house looked like it had been built from the same idea, just rearranged slightly. Perfect lawns, perfect mailboxes. Even the dogs seemed to bark on schedule. I parked at the curb and watched through the windshield as Daniel opened the front door before I even rang the bell. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Dinner's almost ready. Amanda's been cooking since morning." Cooking meant directing other people to cook. I smiled and nodded. "It smells nice." Inside, the kitchen gleamed under the pendant lights. A candle burned on the counter. Something citrusy that was supposed to make people think of summer. Amanda stood by the stove, wearing a white apron over a silk blouse. Her hair was pinned up perfectly, as if she expected a photographer to walk in at any moment. "Well," she said brightly, turning toward me. "You made it." "I did," I answered. "Good," she said, and handed me a small bowl. "Could you stir this sauce for me, slowly? Please. It tends to separate if you're not careful." Her tone was polite, but I knew a test when I heard one. I stirred the sauce, watching it thicken just right. When I set the spoon down, she glanced over. "Not bad," she said. "You've still got it." Dinner was her usual show. A spotless table. Italian night theme. Wine poured into glasses that looked too delicate to touch. Lily ran in, her long hair flying, and hugged me around the waist. "Grandma, guess what I made a volcano at school and it exploded." I laughed and kissed the top of her head. "That's wonderful." "Sweetheart, did you clean up the mess after?" She giggled. "Mostly." Amanda smiled for Lily's sake, but her eyes stayed cold. "Lily. Hands washed before dinner. Please." The meal went as it always did. Amanda talked about her promotion, her team, the new branch they were opening. Daniel listened, nodding in all the right places. Proud, but tired. I mentioned that I'd started helping out at the library again, organizing the local history section. Amanda looked up from her plate. "That's adorable," she said. "Keeping busy is so important at your age." I felt the words land in the middle of my chest. Daniel cleared his throat and changed the subject, asking about Lily's science project. It was how he managed conflict, by stepping over it as though it were a puddle instead of a hole. After dinner, Amanda poured coffee into cups that matched the plates, part of her endless collection of matching things. She leaned against the counter, casual but deliberate. "Mom, I've been thinking, maybe we should get you set up with an automatic grocery service. You know, to make things easier. You wouldn't have to drive anymore." I looked at her and smiled. I like driving, but it's just not safe. All that traffic and construction. Daniel worries. Daniel's eyes flickered. I said, "Maybe we should look into it." He murmured. I took a slow sip of coffee. "You two have it all figured out, don't you?" Amanda laughed. That soft, rehearsed laugh she used at work. "We just want you comfortable. The world's changing fast. Technology, online systems, all that. It's not easy for people your generation to keep up." There it was again. That word. Your generation. As if age were a flaw. Something to apologize for. I set my cup down and folded my napkin neatly beside it. "When I worked in finance," I said quietly, "we used ledgers and carbon paper. We didn't need a computer to catch our mistakes." Amanda's smile faltered just a little. "Of course. But things are different now." "They always are," I said. Daniel shifted in his chair. "Mom, we're just trying to help." "I know, honey," I said, and meant it. He did think he was helping. That was what hurt the most. Lily came back in with her tablet, showing me pictures she'd drawn. I held the screen, admiring every crooked line. "This one's you, Grandma," she said proudly. "See the gray hair?" I laughed. "It's perfect." Amanda looked at her daughter's picture and then at me. "She's very observant. she said. Her tone almost kind this time. She gets that from her father. When it was time to go, I hugged Lily tight. Daniel walked me to the car. You know Amanda means well, he said softly. She just doesn't always know how to say things right. I know, I replied. You chose her because she's confident. That's a good quality in banking. He looked surprised. I guess I did. You guess, I said, and smiled. That's the first honest thing you've said all night. He opened the car door for me, and for a moment, he looked like the boy I used to pack lunches for. The one who thought his mother could fix anything. I almost reached up to touch his face, but I stopped myself. Drive safe, he said. Stepping back, the road home was dark except for the glow of streetlights reflected in the wet pavement. My hand stayed steady on the wheel. I thought about Harold again. How he used to tease me for worrying about manners. You'll out-politeness the whole world one day, he'd said once. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered to life automatically. I sat in the car a moment longer. The engine humming softly. The warmth slowly fading. My reflection in the windshield looked older. Yes, but not fragile. Just tired of being small in rooms I had helped build. Inside, I hung my coat, poured myself a small glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table. The air smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I'd used that morning. Everything in its place. Order was comfort. But that night, comfort didn't come. I thought of Amanda's face at the dinner table. The calm confidence. The way she looked at me like a relic she tolerated. It wasn't hate. It was worse. It was dismissal. I opened the drawer where I kept Harold's note. The handwriting had faded slightly over the years, but the words were still clear. Use it when they forget who you are. I touched the paper lightly with my fingertips, tracing the loop of each letter. I didn't know what use it meant yet. I only knew he had trusted me to understand when the time came. The furnace clicked off. The silence filled every corner of the house. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, replaying every word from dinner. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. Anger burned too hot and too quick. This was colder. Quieter. Something that could wait. When I finally went to bed, I didn't dream. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. The note still open on the nightstand beside me. By morning, the decision wouldn't be made yet. But the shift had begun, somewhere deep beneath the hurt. A seed had cracked open. By morning the house was wrapped in fog, so thick it made the street outside look like it had been erased. I brewed coffee. The old drip machine, gurgling like it always did. And sat at the table while the radio murmured from the counter. A headline about a viral video caught my ear, but I didn't think much of it until I heard the words, Riverdale Savings and Trust. Then, Amanda's name. I turned up the volume. The anchor's voice was calm, almost cheerful. The way people sound when the story isn't about them. A video circulating online shows a bank employee mocking an elderly woman while customers look on. Viewers have expressed outrage, calling for disciplinary action. I froze. They played the clip next. My stomach clenched when I heard my own voice. Small and shaky. Asking to withdraw $50. Then, Amanda's laugh. The words "old lady" hung in the air like smoke. I shut off the radio and sat still, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Someone had filmed the whole thing. Not just filmed it, shared it. Part of me wanted to crawl into a hole, to make it all disappear. But another part of me, the part that had survived harder things, whispered that maybe it was time someone else saw what I had been seeing all along. The phone rang a few minutes later. Daniel. Mom. We need to talk, he said, his voice tight. Amanda's really upset. There's a video online, and people are saying awful things. Can you please tell me you didn't post it? I blinked. I don't even know how to post a video. Daniel. He sighed. Someone filmed you too yesterday. It's everywhere. The bank's getting calls. Amanda's being questioned. You have to tell me what happened. What happened? I said slowly. Is what the video shows. That's not fair. Mom, you know how the internet twists things. I know what I heard. I said. I know what she said. He was silent for a moment. She was having a bad day. I almost laughed. Bad days don't give you permission to humiliate people. Please. Just don't talk to anyone about it. The bank's lawyers are involved. I wasn't planning to. I said. I didn't plan any of this. When I hung up, the house felt different. Quieter, but not empty. I made another cup of coffee and sat by the window. Across the street, Mrs. Gable was scattering birdseed on her porch steps. Wrapped in her oversized red coat, I grabbed my jacket and crossed over. She looked up when she saw me. You look like a woman with too much on her mind, she said. There's a video. I told her. From the bank. She frowned. I saw it. My niece sent it to me on Facebook. Is that you in it? I nodded. Well, she said, brushing crumbs from her hands. About time somebody saw what's been happening to decent people. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't want this kind of attention. You didn't ask for it either, she said. Sometimes life has to shout when nobody listens to a whisper. Back home, I opened my laptop. Something I rarely did except to pay bills. I typed my name into the search bar. The video was everywhere. Thousands of views. Comments from strangers defending me. Some angry. Some kind. One wrote, "That woman raised someone like Amanda. God bless her patience." Another said, "I wish my mom had stood up for herself like that." I didn't feel vindicated. I felt exposed. Around noon, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a woman in a gray coat stood there holding a notepad. Mrs. Wells, I'm Nancy Rivera with the Riverdale Chronicle. I wanted to ask if you'd like to share your side of the story. I don't have a side, I said. I just went to withdraw $50. She smiled gently. That's exactly what people are talking about. How something so small can mean so much. I don't want to make trouble. I said, You're not, she replied. You're part of a bigger conversation. Respect. Dignity. All that. Would you at least let me quote you saying you didn't want anyone to be hurt? That much was true. I nodded. Fine. You can write that. When she left, I leaned against the door and exhaled. My phone buzzed again. A text from Amanda this time. I didn't recognize the tone. You've ruined my life. Do you even realize what you've done? I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another message. Please, call me. I didn't answer that either. Instead, I called Mrs. Gable and asked if she wanted to come over for lunch. She brought soup in a thermos, and we sat in my kitchen, eating quietly. She was the one who broke the silence. So what are you going to do? Nothing, I said. I've had enough noise for one lifetime. She shook her head. No. Dear. Doing nothing is what got them thinking they could walk over you. I looked at her, surprised by the edge in her voice. When my husband died, she went on. His brother tried to take over his small business. Said I was too soft. Too old. I let him. For a while. Then I learned soft doesn't mean stupid. You can be kind and still fight back. I don't even know what fighting back would look like anymore, I said. She smiled. Maybe you'll find out. That afternoon, I took a walk through town to clear my head. At the grocery store, 2 women from church were whispering near the produce aisle. They looked up when they saw me, eyes wide, like they'd just seen a celebrity. Margaret. One of them said, We saw the video. That woman should be ashamed. I nodded politely and moved on. I didn't like the attention, but I couldn't deny the small flicker of satisfaction that rose in my chest. For once, people weren't pretending, nothing had happened. When I got home, there was an envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a short note from the bank. Signed by the HR director. We are conducting an internal review regarding the incident. Thank you for your patience. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it on the counter. Patience. They always asked for patience. They never asked for accountability. By evening, Daniel called again. His voice was low and tired. Mom, Amanda's on leave while they sort this out. She's a wreck. Please don't talk to reporters. Please. I already spoke to one. I said, what did you say? That I didn't want anyone to get hurt. He sighed. You're not helping. Maybe that's not my job anymore. I said. He was quiet. Then said, she's still family. So am I. I said. And ended the call. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fog had lifted outside, and the moonlight poured through the curtains like a spotlight. I got up and walked to the living room. On the mantel, next to Harold's picture, the brass key gleamed faintly. I reached for it, holding it in my palm. It was cool and solid, heavier than I remembered. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for people to remember who I was. Maybe it was time to remind them. I placed the key on the table beside Harold's note and turned off the lamp. For the first time in a long while, the silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt expectant, like the moment before the curtain rises, when the audience doesn't yet know what kind of story they're about to witness. The next morning, the world outside felt sharper, the air colder, as if it knew something had shifted. I brewed my coffee and sat in front of the small wooden box Harold had left me. The brass key lay next to it, glinting in the early light. For years I had ignored that box, telling myself whatever it held belonged to another lifetime. But now, with the house quiet and my name circulating online like a headline, I felt an old part of myself wake up. I took a deep breath and opened the box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed around the folds, was a flash drive, a few documents, and the original letter from Harold's trust lawyer. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. It confirmed what I had almost forgotten. I wasn't just a beneficiary of Harold Wells' trust. I was a founding partner and sole successor. For a long moment, I sat perfectly still. My reflection stared back from the black surface of the turned-off laptop across the table. I saw the woman everyone else saw. The old lady who needed help with grocery delivery and auto pay. But underneath her, I could almost see the woman I used to be. The one who managed books and audited reports without breaking a sweat. I plugged in the flash drive. The password prompt blinked on the screen. It took me 2 tries before the right one came to me. Harold always used our wedding date, followed by the word trust. The files opened one by one. Reports, portfolio breakdowns, letters to clients. Then, at the very bottom, a folder labeled Acquisitions. When I clicked it, I froze. Riverdale Financial Holdings. The same company that owned Riverdale Savings and Trust. The same company that signed Amanda's paycheck. For a second, I thought I was mistaken. Then I saw the date. 2 months earlier. The trust had finalized an acquisition of majority shares. It was right there in black and white. I scrolled through the contract, slowly, my pulse picking up. My name appeared as one of the primary approving signatories through the trust's representative branch. It took me a moment to understand what that meant. Technically, I was now a major shareholder of the very institution that employed Amanda. The irony was too sharp to laugh at. I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath that shook more than I wanted it to. Harold's note echoed in my mind. Use it when they forget who you are. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I checked balances, transaction records, everything. My small, tidy life suddenly peeled open to reveal a much larger one beneath it. The trust's assets had grown quietly through careful management, diversified across sectors. Harold's modest investments had become something enormous. I was sitting at the heart of a financial network worth over $1 billion. Around noon, I called Gregory Palmer, Harold's old colleague and one of the trust's original attorneys. I hadn't spoken to him in years. His secretary answered first. And when Gregory's voice finally came on the line, it sounded older but still smooth. "Margaret," he said, "I was wondering when you'd reach out." "Then you knew I'd call?" I asked. "I hoped you would. Harold wanted you to have control when you were ready." I swallowed. "Gregory, did you know Riverdale Financial was under the trust?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "It was a strategic move. Low risk. Stable returns. You approved it years ago when we shifted from municipal bonds." I tried to remember signing anything of that scale, but the memory was faint. "I need to see all recent contracts, especially regarding the holdings that touch Riverdale Savings." "I can have them to you by the afternoon," he said. "What's going on?" "Margaret, something personal," I said, "and something I should have handled a long time ago." When I hung up, the house seemed smaller, like it could barely contain what was happening. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the quiet street. My neighbors' houses glowed softly in the sun. I imagined Amanda sitting in her office, still pretending to be unbothered while her phone buzzed with messages from HR. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted truth. By the time Gregory arrived that evening, the sky had turned a bruised gray. He carried a slim briefcase and wore that same herringbone coat he'd had when Harold was alive. We sat at the dining table with 2 cups of tea, and he spread the documents out neatly. "This, he said, tapping one of the folders, "is the current investment structure. You technically hold controlling interest through the Wells Family Trust. The board recognizes you under the corporate alias M. Wells. You could walk into any executive meeting and they'd have to listen." I stared at the name printed in bold at the top of the document. M. Wells. The ghost of me that had quietly ruled from the background all this time. "What if I wanted to make changes?" I asked. "You'd need to request a review meeting." "But Margaret, may I ask? Why now?" I looked at him, and the words came easier than I expected. "Because they forgot who I am. And I think it's time I remind them." Gregory's mouth curved into a slow, approving smile. "Then we'll set it up." He left shortly after, promising to call in the morning. When the door shut behind him, I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock. Later that night, I made myself a sandwich and sat in front of my laptop again. The local news had moved on to a different story, but social media hadn't. The clip of Amanda still circulated, gathering more comments. I scrolled through them until I couldn't anymore. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was something colder, deeper. The slow realization that power, once lost, could still be reclaimed. Around midnight, I opened a blank document and began typing a letter addressed to the board of Riverdale Financial Holdings. My request was simple: an emergency review of the bank's ethical compliance and staff conduct, particularly at the Riverdale Savings Branch. I signed it as M. Wells, Beneficiary Representative, Wells Family Trust. When I hit save, a calm washed over me, like the stillness that comes after a storm decides where it will land. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. The next morning would be different. I cleaned the kitchen, set out my navy dress, and placed Harold's note inside my purse. Outside, the street was quiet, the sun just beginning to rise over the rooftops. I didn't know exactly what I was walking into yet, but I knew I wouldn't walk in small. Before going to bed, I placed the brass key beside the letter on my desk. It no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a reminder of the life I had built, piece by piece, even while others pretended it didn't exist. When I finally turned off the light, I could still see the faint gleam of the key through the darkness. It rested there, steady and waiting, as if it had been patient long enough. Morning light spilled through the curtains like a quiet promise, pale and thin, touching the brass key on my desk. I got up before the alarm, dressed slowly in the navy dress I had laid out, and tied my hair into a low twist. I didn't wear jewelry. I didn't need to. Power doesn't sparkle, it waits. The drive to the bank took less than 15 minutes. Riverdale's downtown was just waking up. Coffee shops were opening, their windows fogging with steam, and people in coats hurried along the sidewalks. As I pulled into the parking lot, I could see the reflection of the building's glass front catching the morning sun. It looked the same as yesterday. But everything had changed. Inside, the air smelled like paper and sanitizer. The faint sound of printers whirring filled the silence between conversations. I stood for a moment by the entrance, watching the employees as they moved behind the counters, heads bent, unaware. Then I saw her. Amanda. She was standing near the teller stations, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking against the tile as she gave instructions to a young man in a suit. She looked tired, though she'd covered it with makeup. When her eyes lifted and found me, confusion flickered there first, then annoyance. "Maggie," she said, forcing a smile as she walked toward me. "I don't think you're supposed to be here. The HR department is still sorting through everything." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm here for business." "Business," she repeated, letting out a short laugh. "You don't have any business here." Before I could answer, the elevator doors opened at the far end of the lobby, and a man in a gray suit stepped out, adjusting his tie. He was tall, mid-50s, with the nervous precision of someone who managed too many people and slept too little. "Mrs. Wells," he said as he hurried forward, extending a hand. "I'm Marcus Chin, Regional Director for Riverdale Financial Holdings. It's an honor to meet you in person." Amanda blinked. Her smile faltered. "You know my mother-in-law." Marcus looked confused. "Your mother-in-law," he turned back to me, his expression sharpening. "This is M. Wells from the Wells Family Trust." "Yes," I said simply. Color drained from Amanda's face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Marcus gestured toward the glass conference room beside the lobby. "We've prepared everything for you, Mrs. Wells. Thank you for coming on such short notice." The entire bank seemed to go still as I walked past the counters. A few employees looked up, curiosity flashing across their faces. Even the hum of the machines seemed to dim. Amanda trailed behind us, pale and silent. Inside the conference room, sunlight pooled across the long table, glinting off the polished surface. Marcus motioned for me to take the head seat. He remained standing, fidgeting slightly. Amanda hovered near the doorway, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "I understand you requested a review of branch operations," Marcus said carefully. "I did," I replied. "And I also have a transaction to make before we begin." His eyebrows rose. "Of course. We can arrange that for you personally." I folded my hands on the table. "I'd like to withdraw the entirety of my assets from Riverdale Financial Holdings, effective immediately." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and certain. Marcus blinked twice, as though he hadn't heard correctly. "Mrs. Wells, may I confirm?" "Yes," I said. "All of it. The full 1.7 billion. Amanda gasped, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Marcus's composure cracked for a split second. "That's a significant move," he said slowly. I assume you have concerns we should address first. I do, I said. But my decision stands. I've already filed the notice with my legal counsel. The funds are to be transferred to my account with Wells Global Investments. He nodded tightly, scribbling something in his notepad. I'll need to contact the compliance team. This will trigger a temporary freeze until the verification clears. That's fine, I said. It will give everyone a moment to reflect. Amanda finally found her voice. You can't just walk in here and do this. Do you know what kind of chaos that will cause? I turned to her. I think I do. Marcus cleared his throat. Mrs. Wells, if I may. We would like to understand what prompted this. Your trust has been a valued partner of ours for over a decade. It still can be, I said. Once this branch has addressed its leadership problem. His pen stopped mid-note. Leadership problem. Yes. Culture starts at the top. If a branch manager feels comfortable humiliating a customer in public, what does that say about the organization she represents? Amanda's voice rose, trembling. You're twisting this. That video, it was taken out of context. People online blow things up for clicks. Marcus looked from her to me, then back again. Amanda, he said quietly. Is there truth to this incident? I was joking, she said, her voice cracking. It was harmless. She's family. Exactly, I said, my tone even. And if this is how family is treated, how do you treat strangers? Marcus exhaled slowly. Understood. He reached for his phone. I'll notify the board. And HR will proceed with disciplinary action pending review. Amanda stared at him, then at me. You're firing me, you can't. Her voice broke. She turned back to me, eyes glassy with disbelief. Maggie, please, we're family. You can't do this to me. I met her gaze, feeling an ache in my chest that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite satisfaction. I didn't do this to you. Amanda, you did this to yourself. Outside the glass walls, the lobby had gone unnaturally still. A few customers stood frozen, watching as if they could sense that something important was happening. Marcus spoke quietly into his phone, issuing instructions I couldn't hear. When he hung up, his expression was grave. The transaction is in process. Mrs. Wells, there will be a temporary system hold while the assets are transferred. You may notice some operations paused for the next several hours. That's all right, I said. Sometimes the system needs to stop before it can start working again. Amanda's clipboard slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the floor. She sank into a chair, face pale, lips trembling. You've ruined me, she whispered. I stood slowly. No. I reminded you. When I stepped out of the conference room, the murmur of the lobby returned, but softer now. Cautious. Employees glanced up from their desks, unsure whether to greet me or avoid me. I gave a polite nod and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard the faint echo of Marcus's voice giving orders. The words freeze and transfer floated faintly through the air. Outside, the sunlight had turned warmer, cutting through the morning chill. I paused by the steps and looked back through the glass. Amanda sat with her head in her hands while Marcus spoke quietly to another executive. The sight should have filled me with triumph, but it didn't. What I felt instead was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm when the air smells clean again. I walked to my car and opened the door. My hands didn't shake this time. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the bank's automatic doors slid shut behind me. In the rearview mirror, the building looked smaller, almost fragile. I turned onto the main road, letting the sound of the tires fill the silence. For the first time in years, I felt the faint pull of control settling back into place. Like a thread I dropped and finally picked up again. The road stretched ahead, long and open, and I drove toward the horizon, where the morning light was breaking through the last of the clouds. The sky that afternoon looked like brushed steel, flat and pale, stretching endlessly over the quiet highway. I drove with the window cracked just enough to let in the smell of wet leaves. My phone buzzed twice in the passenger seat, but I didn't reach for it. I knew who it was. Some part of me knew that Daniel had seen the news by now. When I got home, the answering machine light blinked like a heartbeat. I pressed play and stood still as Daniel's voice filled the kitchen. "Mom, what did you do?" They're saying you pulled the entire fund. The bank froze accounts across the region. Amanda's been terminated. Please call me back. The message ended with silence that felt louder than the words themselves. I deleted it. Then, I turned off the ringer, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window while the first raindrops began to tap the glass. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath for too many years. Later that evening, there was a knock on the door. A hard, hurried sound. I knew before I opened it who it would be. Daniel stood on the porch, soaked from the rain, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. "You're already here." He walked past me and stopped in the middle of the living room, dripping water onto the rug. "You had no right," he said quietly. I closed the door behind him. To what? To destroy her career. To humiliate her like that. To humiliate us. "Humiliate you," I repeated. "She did that herself. Daniel. I didn't have to lift a finger." He ran a hand through his hair. "You could have talked to me first. We could have fixed this privately." "Privately," I said, letting out a bitter laugh. "You mean quietly? Like everything else this family likes to hide." He turned toward me, anger flickering behind his eyes. "You've changed. This isn't you." I looked at him for a long moment. "No, Daniel. This is exactly me. You just never bothered to see it." He flinched, and for a moment I almost softened. But then he said, "She's my wife. Mom, you didn't just hurt her. You hurt all of us." I set my teacup down. "She mocked me in public, Daniel, in front of strangers, all because I asked to withdraw $50. Do you know what that feels like?" His shoulders sagged. "She told me it was a joke." "She's right about one thing," I said. "It was a joke, but I was the punchline." He rubbed his face. "Defeated. What happens now? That depends on you." I said, "On whether you want to keep pretending this family is built on love when it's really built on appearances." He looked around the room, at the photos on the shelves, at the quiet walls that had seen too many years of polite silence. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "You don't understand what you've started. The family's furious. Dad called me from Florida. Said you've embarrassed everyone." I felt something inside me close, slow and final. Then maybe embarrassment is the first honest thing that's happened to this family in years. He stared at me for a long time, like he was searching for the mother he used to know. Then he picked up his coat. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said. I nodded. "That makes two of us." He left without another word. The rain had softened to a drizzle by then. I watched from the window as his car pulled away, headlights cutting through the mist until they vanished. For a while, I just stood there, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking steadily on the wall. Then I turned off the lights and went to my study. The folder from the trust meeting was still on the desk where Gregory had left it. I opened it again, scanning the pages I already knew by heart. The numbers no longer scared me. They felt like familiar coordinates. A map of a life I had once abandoned. At the bottom of one of the documents was a list of the subsidiary holdings. Riverdale Savings was only one of them. There were others, spread across the country, Harold had built something bigger than I ever realized. The next morning, Gregory called. "The transfer is complete," he said. "The freeze was temporary. Just as expected. You now have full liquid control over all accounts." "Thank you," I said. He hesitated. "There's been fallout. You know, local news ran with the story. They framed it as a whistleblower situation. A stand against corporate arrogance. You're being painted as a folk hero." I laughed softly. "Folk hero? That's new. I just thought you should know. If you want, I can release a statement clarifying your position." "No," I said. "Let them think what they want. The truth is simpler." "And what's that?" I was tired of being small. There was a pause. Then he said, "Harold would have been proud." I hung up and sat for a while, letting the quiet settle again. Then I got up and walked to the back door. The rain had stopped. The garden looked fresh and wild, the soil dark and rich. I stepped outside. The grass damp beneath my shoes. Across the fence, Mrs. Gable waved from her porch. "You've been on the news, you know," she called out. "I figured as much," I said. "They're calling you the woman who brought down a bank." I smiled. "That's dramatic. The bank's still standing." She chuckled. "Maybe. But not the same way it was." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet again. But not in the same lonely way as before. This quiet had purpose. I opened the drawer where I kept Harold's note and unfolded it once more. The words seemed to glow under the lamp. "Use it when they forget who you are." I whispered it aloud, as if he were still there to hear me. I used it, Harold, and they remember now. I sat for a long time, staring at the note, until the clock on the wall read midnight. Then I pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer and began to write. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a plan. If I had power, I decided, I would use it. But not the way they expected. The world had enough vengeance. What it lacked was correction, accountability. When I finished, I folded the paper and placed it inside the wooden box with the brass key. Then I turned out the light. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear. The first stars appeared. Faint but steady. Somewhere far away. The bank systems were recalibrating. The numbers shifting quietly in their digital vaults. And here, in my small house on Maple Street, I felt the strange, unfamiliar calm of someone who had finally stopped asking for permission. The next morning, the air was sharp with cold. The kind that makes every sound carry farther. I stood by the kitchen window, watching a thin layer of frost melt off the grass. The world outside looked clean, untouched, like it didn't remember what happened yesterday. But I did. The plan I had written the night before was folded neatly in my coat pocket. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. Power without direction becomes destruction. And I'd already seen too much of that in my lifetime. Around 9, I called Gregory again. "I want to make some changes to the trust," I told him. His voice was careful. "What kind of changes?" "Redistribution. Community investment. There's no use sitting on that much money when it could do something." He hesitated, the way lawyers do when the word philanthropy enters a conversation. "You mean donations, not charity," I said. "Investment. Real projects. Education. Small business loans. Community gardens. The kind of things that make people stand on their own again." He paused, then said, "That's going to make some noise. Margaret, people don't like when power shifts downward. I've lived long enough to know they never do." I said, "Set up a meeting with the board. I want this in motion before the quarter ends." By noon, the local paper had published another story. The headline read, Retired banker turns financial fallout into reform plan. Someone had leaked my letter to the board. I guessed it was Gregory, though I didn't mind. For once, the spotlight wasn't something to hide from. The phone rang again. It was Daniel. His voice was cautious this time. Get her, Mom. I read the article. Are you really doing this? I am. I said. You're giving it all away. I'm not giving it away. I'm building something with it. He sighed. Amanda says you're trying to make her look like the villain. I don't have to try. I said softly. She's done that herself. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, she's leaving town. She can't face anyone. She says people look at her differently now. I imagine they do. I said. He sounded tired. She made mistakes. Mom, we all have. I know, I said. But some mistakes have to be faced, not covered. After we hung up, I sat with my tea for a while, thinking about him. He was a good man who had been raised to think silence was love. Maybe he'd learn differently now. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to meet Gregory at his office. The small law firm sat above a pharmacy, just as it always had. He met me at the door with 2 cups of coffee and that same steady look he used to give Harold when numbers didn't add up. The board meeting's scheduled for Friday, he said. But I need to warn you. This proposal will make you enemies. Good, I said. It'll mean I'm doing something right. He smiled. You sound like Harold. Inside the conference room, I reviewed the preliminary drafts. The trust would reallocate 20% of its assets into a foundation aimed at sustainable community programs. Another 10% would go towards scholarships for underrepresented students in finance. I wanted to open doors in the very field that had once kept them closed to anyone who didn't look or sound like they belonged. When we finished, Gregory asked quietly, "Do you ever regret how you handled the bank situation?" I looked out the window, watching a delivery truck pull up to the pharmacy downstairs. No, I said. I regret waiting so long to act. That evening, I stopped by the grocery store. The same cashier who'd once watched Amanda belittle me now looked nervous when she rang up my items. I saw you on TV, she said. You did what a lot of us wish we could. I smiled gently. It's never too late to start standing up for yourself. When I got home, a small envelope was waiting in the mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, looping and neat. It was from Amanda. I carried it inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words were short. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't understand what I was doing until it was too late. Please take care of Daniel. He still believes in you. I folded the letter back up and stared at it for a long time. For the first time since the day at the bank, I felt the tightness in my chest ease just a little. Maybe remorse was its own kind of justice. The next morning, I went for a walk. The sky was clear, the kind of bright blue that only happens after rain. I stopped by the community garden near the library, the one I used to volunteer at. The gate was locked, but through the fence I could see the empty flower beds waiting for spring. I made a decision right there. When I got home, I called the city council office. This is Margaret Wells, I said. I'd like to fund a restoration project for the Riverdale Library Garden. The woman on the other end sounded startled. You mean sponsor it? No, I said. Own it. Endow it. Permanently. 2 days later, a local reporter came by to interview me again. She was young, maybe 30. Bright eyes and quick with her questions. Why the garden? She asked. You could fund anything. Why this small project? Because that's where I learned what community feels like. I said, it's where people remember how to see each other again. She nodded and smiled. That's going to make a great story. I almost told her it wasn't a story. It was a return. But I let her have her headline. People need their stories. That night, the house was quiet again. I sat at my desk, flipping through the final version of the trust documents Gregory had emailed. My name looked strange among all the signatures, bold and certain. I thought about the woman who used to sign papers without reading them, trusting others to handle what she didn't want to face. That woman was gone now. Before bed, I walked into the living room and looked at the photo on the mantel. Harold's smile was the same as always, gentle and sure. I spoke softly into the still air. I think I finally used it the way you meant me to. The lamp beside me flickered once before steadying. I smiled. Maybe it was just the wiring. Or maybe it was something else. Outside, the frost had returned, coating the street in silver. But this time, I didn't feel the cold pressing against the windows. Inside this small, ordinary house, I felt the weight of peace, real and earned, settling quietly where bitterness used to live. Tomorrow would bring meetings and paperwork and maybe even more headlines. But tonight, there was just calm. The sound of the furnace kicking on. The steady breath of a home that finally felt alive again. Morning sunlight slid through the blinds and rested softly on the stack of signed documents on my desk. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with the familiar ache in my chest that came from pretending to be smaller than I was. I brewed my coffee, the smell filling the kitchen, and stood for a long moment looking out the window at the frost melting from the grass. The phone rang just as I sat down. It was Gregory. His voice brisk but warm. "The board approved everything," he said. "The Margaret Wells Foundation is officially registered." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Then it's done." "It's just beginning," he replied. "Your proposal is already making waves. You'll be hearing from the press again. Probably from people in positions higher than you expect. Not everyone likes change, especially when it comes from someone they underestimated." "I'm used to that," I said. He chuckled. "That's what worries them." After we hung up, I sat there with the quiet hum of the house around me. The thought of being a public figure again made me uneasy. But I wasn't doing this for attention. I was doing it for the woman I had been for most of my life. The one who thought staying invisible was a kind of safety. That afternoon, the local TV station sent a young reporter to film a short segment at the library garden. The crew was small, just a camera operator and a producer with wind-chapped cheeks. They wanted a quote, something that would sound good at the end of the evening news. When the reporter asked why I'd chosen to start with this project, I looked around at the patch of earth, waiting for spring, and said simply, "Because every garden starts with soil that's been turned over. Sometimes you have to disturb what's settled before new things can grow." They liked that. They asked if I'd smile for the camera. So I did. Even though my hands were cold and my heart was beating faster than it should. Later that evening, I stopped by the grocery store again. People still stared when they recognized me. But the tone had changed. There was respect in their eyes now. A kind of quiet acknowledgement that hadn't been there before. A young mother in line behind me touched my arm gently and said, "My mom showed me your story. She said you reminded her of herself." I smiled. "Tell her she's stronger than she thinks." When I got home, there was a message waiting on the machine. It was Daniel. His voice was softer this time. "Mom, I don't know how to start this, but I want to see you. Can I come by tomorrow?" I hesitated for a moment before picking up the phone and calling him back. "Of course," I said. "Dinner at 6. I spent the next day cooking. Something I hadn't done in a while. Roast chicken. Potatoes. Green beans with almonds. The kind of meal Harold used to call Sunday food, even if it was a Tuesday. When Daniel arrived, he looked older than I remembered. Grief does that, even when you're grieving the living. He hugged me longer than he had in years. "You look good," he said. "So do you." I lied. We sat down to eat. The air between us was careful. Like thin ice. But it held. For a while. We talked about nothing: his work, the weather, Lily's school project. Then, as we finished the meal, he set his fork down and said, "I read Amanda's letter." I nodded. So did I. "She's gone to stay with her sister in Portland," he said. "She's trying to get help." "That's good," I said. He looked at me across the table. "I didn't see it before. How she treated you. How I let her treat you." I kept thinking, keeping peace meant keeping quiet. "It's a common mistake," I said gently. "It took me most of my life to unlearn it." He exhaled. Long and slow. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words sat between us like something fragile. I reached across the table and took his hand. "You're still my son, Daniel. That doesn't change." He nodded. Eyes wet. "You're different now." "So are you," I said. "Maybe that's the point." We didn't say much after that. But the silence felt easier. The kind that comes when truth finally finds its place. After he left, I sat in the living room for a while, watching the shadows from the lamp stretch across the carpet. For years I had been the quiet background in other people's stories. Now, somehow, I had become the one writing them. The next morning, I met Gregory again at the community center to sign the final endowment papers. The foundation would officially fund 3 projects in its first year: the library garden, a financial literacy program for women over 50, and a scholarship fund named after Harold. As I signed each page, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: a sense of continuity. When it was done, Gregory closed the folder and looked at me. "You know," he said, "you could still live quietly if you wanted. No one would blame you." "I've lived quietly enough," I said. "It's time to live deliberately." That afternoon, I walked home along Maple Street. The sun was already dipping low, casting long golden light over the houses. Mrs. Gable waved from her porch again, her ever-present mug of tea in hand. "I saw the news," she called out. "You're famous now." "Let's hope it doesn't last," I said. She laughed. "You always did underestimate yourself." I stopped by her fence. Maybe I used to. Not anymore. When I got home, I noticed the brass key still sitting on my desk. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a reminder that some doors stay locked until you remember you've had the key all along. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done since Harold died. I wrote about fear and silence, and how both can feel like protection until you realize they're cages. I wrote about how strength doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like staying steady when the world expects you to crumble. When I finished, I closed the book and placed it beside Harold's note. Outside, the wind was rising again, rattling the branches against the house. But inside, everything was still. The foundation papers sat neatly stacked on my desk. The ink still fresh. Tomorrow would be meetings and phone calls and logistics. But tonight, I allowed myself the rare comfort of peace. I poured a small glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched as the lights from the street reflected faintly in the glass, like small stars caught between 2 worlds. Somewhere, a car passed by slowly, its headlights tracing the outline of my front yard. And for a fleeting second, I thought about Harold's words again. The quiet instruction he had left behind. Use it when they forget who you are. I smiled to myself. They remembered now. But more importantly, so did I. The house held its breath through the early hours, a kind of waiting that made the clock sound louder than usual. I brewed coffee and sat with the file Gregory had left on the table. The pages were neat, the signatures crisp, the ink still smelling faintly metallic. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. And then the street went quiet again. By mid-morning, a certified envelope arrived. The return address was Riverdale Financial Holdings. Inside was a formal note on heavy paper. The board acknowledged my withdrawal in precise language and confirmed a temporary system hold that had lasted 3 hours across regional operations, while compliance executed the transfer. They also noted that HR had concluded a preliminary review at the Riverdale Savings Branch and was proceeding to a formal action plan. The words were clinical, but I could feel the ripple underneath them. My phone buzzed. Gregory said the state regulator had requested a courtesy briefing about the viral incident and the subsequent freeze. He sounded calm, almost conversational. He also said the forensic review on the 2019 authorizations had come back. There were discrepancies. Signature dynamics did not match my file. The notary log showed a time and place that did not align with my calendar or with my location records from my old phone. I listened without interrupting, the way I used to listen to Harold when he talked through market risk. When Gregory finished, I asked if he could come by in the afternoon. He arrived with a small stack of documents and that steady presence I had come to rely on. We sat at the dining table again. He slid a page toward me and tapped gently at the bottom corner. The curve on the capital M was wrong. The slant through the G was too smooth. My hand had never made a line like that in 68 years. The notary stamp belonged to a branch across town that I rarely visited. The witness signature belonged to a junior associate who had since moved to another state. Gregory laid out the pieces with the same care a doctor might use when explaining a difficult diagnosis. He said we could file a formal complaint. He said there were remedies that did not require courtrooms. He asked what I wanted. I told him I wanted the truth clear on paper. I wanted every access associated with my trust revoked for anyone but me. I wanted to notify Daniel before any filings so that no one could say I had acted behind a door. Gregory nodded and said he would prepare the revocations and a letter of notice. An alert flashed on my laptop while he was packing his briefcase. The Riverdale Chronicle had posted an update. A second video had surfaced, recorded by a teller from the back office the day of the incident. It showed laughter after I left the counter. A joke repeated. A face that looked too much like delight on the wrong side of kindness. The article said the bank had issued a statement to apologize to customers, to me by name, and to announce mandatory ethics training and a leadership review. My stomach turned, not from victory or anger, but from the knowledge that the thing I had hoped was a single lapse had been a habit polished in private. By late afternoon, Daniel called. His voice sounded like he had not slept. He said we needed to talk. I said 6 o'clock. He arrived on time. Alone. His face pinched and pale. There was no storm in him this time. Only a kind of fearful quiet. We sat at the table where I had placed 2 clean glasses and a carafe of water. I told him I needed him to hear me all the way through, before he answered. He nodded and looked down at his hands. I explained the findings. The notary stamp that did not match my visits. The witness who had no record of meeting me. The signature analysis. The routing change that followed. Moving dividends into an account I had not authorized. I kept my voice level. I kept my words short. The truth does not need decoration. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, like a man bracing for a wave. Then he said he had signed when I was traveling to Columbus for a dentist appointment. That the bank had been switching systems. That it was meant to be temporary. That Amanda had told him it was fine. That she would fix it later. He said he had not meant to steal. He had meant to move things along. I let the silence sit between us. In that silence, I felt everything I had lost and everything I had finally taken back. I told him, intent does not erase impact. I told him this was not a misunderstanding. It was a line crossed with a pen. I told him the access was revoked and that Gregory would send him the notice. He put his head in his hands. He said he was sorry in a voice that belonged to the boy he had once been. I believed the boy. I did not excuse the man. When he left, the evening settled in soft and gray. I walked from room to room without turning on lights, feeling the contours of the house by memory. At the mantel, I touched the frame of Harold's photo and felt the old, steadying calm of his gaze. In the kitchen, I rinsed the glasses and set them upside down to dry. A small, an ordinary ritual, for a night that did not feel ordinary at all. The next day brought the official press release from the bank. They apologized in plain words and announced the termination of the employee involved. They described a culture review and a donation to the county senior services program. It was careful and measured, and exactly what corporate statements sound like when they need to do three things at once: apologize, promise, protect. I read it twice and then set it aside. There are some repairs money can help with, and others it cannot touch. By noon, my phone buzzed again. Gregory said Daniel's employer had initiated an internal review. Because the forged authorization involved financial documents and electronic submissions, compliance had flagged it as a breach of ethics. The word termination sat in the middle of the sentence like a stone in water. I closed my eyes and saw Daniel at 6, at 16, at 38. I saw the dark hair that used to fall into his eyes when he was concentrating on a puzzle. I saw the way he had smiled that morning he got his first real job offer. Proud and shy, all at once. I put my hand flat on the table and breathed. In the afternoon, the mail brought a short handwritten note from Marcus. He thanked me for the clarity, for the insistence that the company look straight at what it did not want to see. He said he knew the freeze had caused trouble, and he appreciated my patience. He said he had learned more in the last week than in his last year. I folded the note and slipped it into the drawer with Harold's letter. Toward evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Nancy, from the Chronicle. Her notepad tucked under her arm, the wind flushing her cheeks. She asked if I would go on the record to say how I felt about the bank's statement and the day's events. I told her I felt relief and sorrow in equal parts. Relief because the truth had been named. Sorrow because naming it had cost more than I ever wanted it to cost. She asked if I blamed Daniel. I said I held him responsible. Then I told her responsibility and blame are not always the same thing. She nodded, wrote it down, and thanked me for my time. When the house was quiet again, I made tea and sat by the window. The streetlights clicked on one after another. Small moons lined up along Maple Street. Across the road, Mrs. Gable's living room glowed that soft yellow I associate with safety. I watched her silhouette move from chair to lamp and felt a little less alone. Before bed, I wrote 3 letters. One to the bank's board, confirming that my withdrawal remained in place until the culture review was completed and verified by an outside firm. One to the regulator, acknowledging their professionalism and offering cooperation with any additional questions. One to Daniel. In his, I wrote about love that holds firm even when it cannot hold close. I wrote that there would be no police report, but there would be restitution and repair and a very long season of distance. I wrote that I hoped he would find a way to become again the man I knew he could be. I sealed the envelopes and set them by the door to mail in the morning. The house sighed as the furnace kicked on. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then gave up. I turned off the lamp and stood in the blue dark of the living room. The brass key on my desk picked up a faint slice of light and glowed. Small and stubborn. I went to bed without the tightness I had carried for so many nights. The decisions were made. The papers were signed. The truth was doing its slow and necessary work. In the quiet, I could finally hear the smallest sounds again. The ones that get lost when life is loud. The whisper of the curtain as the heat rose. The soft tick of the hall clock. My own breathing. Steady and even. Morning would bring whatever came next. Tonight I let the dark hold me while I rested in the only victory I wanted. Not winning. Not punishing. Just the clean, simple fact of a boundary kept. Morning arrived with a cold wind that rattled the front windows, carrying the sound of dry leaves across the porch. I stayed in bed longer than usual, listening to the rhythm of the furnace and the steady hum of a world that had finally started to move on without me needing to push it. When I got up, the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the scent that had become the background of my days since the foundation took shape. The envelopes I'd written last night were gone from the hall table. I'd mailed them early, just after sunrise. The woman at the post office counter had smiled when she saw me. "Still busy changing the town, Mrs. Wells," she said. I laughed softly. "Just keeping the paperwork honest." After breakfast, I turned on the small television in the kitchen. The local news was running a short feature about the Riverdale Library Garden Project, showing volunteers clearing out the old flower beds. The reporter mentioned my name once, briefly, and then shifted the focus to the children who'd signed up for the spring planting program. Watching them made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt for years. It wasn't pain. It was something like pride. By mid-morning, the phone rang again. It was Gregory. The regulators called back. He said, "Everything's clean. You're officially clear of any liability for the authorization issues. The investigation closed this morning." I exhaled. Slow and steady. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Daniel's case, though, it's not looking good. They're recommending permanent revocation of his securities license. There's still time for him to appeal." "But I understand," I said quietly. "He'll have to decide what kind of man he wants to be next." We hung up, and I stood there for a while with my hands still on the phone, the sound of the dial tone filling the silence. I didn't cry. There was a time when I would have, but the truth doesn't leave much room for tears once it settles in. Around noon, there was another knock at the door. It was Daniel. He looked thinner, older, and tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. He didn't wait for an invitation this time. He just stood there, hands in his coat pockets, his voice low. "They fired me," he said. I nodded. "Gregory told me." He looked around the entryway, as if he were trying to remember it. "They said I can reapply in 5 years. Maybe, if I keep my record clean." "I'm sorry," I said. He gave a short laugh, bitter and small. "You were right. You know, about everything. Amanda. The bank. The lies I told myself. I just kept thinking it was easier not to ask questions." "It always is," I said. He took a deep breath and looked at me. "I came to ask if I could stay here for a little while. Just until I figure things out. I'll help around the house. I'll pay rent." The instinct to say yes rose quickly. The old mother's reflex that never really dies. But I caught it before it escaped. "Daniel," I said gently, "I think it's time you build something that's yours. Starting here again wouldn't help either of us." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "I knew you'd say that." We stood in silence for a moment before he stepped forward and hugged me. It was the first time in years he had done that without hesitation. His shoulders trembled. I held him until he let go. As he walked down the porch steps, he turned back once. "You taught me something, Mom. It just took me too long to understand it." "What's that?" I asked. "That respect isn't given. It's earned by who you decide to be when no one's watching." He gave me a small smile, then got into his car and drove away. I watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, then closed the door and leaned against it. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It felt necessary. That evening, "Mrs. Gable called." Her voice crackled through the line, cheerful as ever. "I saw your son leaving earlier. Everything all right?" "It will be," I said, "eventually. You should come by for dinner tomorrow. I'm making stew. Bring that fancy bread you like to bake." "I will," I said, "and maybe some wine." When I hung up, I walked to the study. The brass key still sat on the desk beside Harold's note. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers. For so long, I thought it was meant to unlock something literal, some secret account or safe. Now I understood it was never about that. It was about agency, about remembering that the door was always mine to open. Later that night, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the crickets start their slow evening chorus. The street was quiet, the kind of small-town quiet that carries its own comfort. A couple walked by with their dog and waved. I waved back. The stars were faint through the haze, but I could still pick out the Big Dipper above the trees. Harold used to tell me the handle pointed toward true north, that no matter where you stood, you could always find your way back if you followed it long enough. I thought about that now. How finding your way back doesn't always mean returning to where you started. Sometimes it means stepping forward into the version of yourself that's been waiting all along. Before going inside, I looked down the street toward the bank. I couldn't see it from here, but I knew it was there. Still standing, lights probably glowing late into the night, while clerks shuffled through papers and numbers continued to dance across screens. Somewhere inside, the people who used to look through me were probably looking inward now. Maybe that was enough. I went back in and turned off the porch light. The house was dim but warm, the kind of warmth that feels earned. In the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection. The woman staring back looked older. Yes, but not diminished. Her eyes were clear, her posture straight. For the first time in years, I didn't look like someone waiting for permission to exist. I walked to the table, folded Harold's note once more, and slipped it into the small wooden box. Then I locked it with the brass key, not to hide it, but to close the circle. The message had done its work. Upstairs, I pulled back the covers and lay down. The house creaked softly in the wind, and somewhere outside, a train horn sounded faintly in the distance. I thought about tomorrow, the meeting with the local school board, the call with the foundation accountants, the dinner with Mrs. Gable. Small things, steady things, life. Reshaped but still moving. As I drifted toward sleep, a thought crossed my mind, light and quiet as a breath. It wasn't about power or money or revenge. It was about something far simpler. Dignity. How easy it is to lose it without realizing, and how much work it takes to claim it back. That was the work I had left to do, and I would do it, one quiet day at a time. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces. A warmer breeze on a Tuesday. The first shy crocus poking through last year's leaves. The sound of children returning to the library steps after school. By the time the garden gate swung open for the dedication, the beds were lined with fresh soil and small stakes with handwritten labels. Lavender here, coneflowers there. A row of tomato cages waiting like empty frames for something that would soon have shape. The sign went up at noon. Riverdale Library Garden. Endowed by the Margaret Wells Foundation. The crowd clapped politely, then warmly. Then, with a kind of sweetness that made my throat hurt, Nancy from the Chronicle stood near the back with her notepad. But she did not push to the front. She had learned the rhythm of this town. Let the story breathe, then write it. Lily slipped her hand into mine and tugged. She had a sealed envelope, the kind with a gold star on the flap. She whispered that she made this at school and that I should open it later. I told her I would, and that I loved the way she tied the ribbon. She said she had practiced 12 times on her stuffed bear. That was Lily. She practiced love the way other people practiced piano. Charlotte arrived with a clipboard and the calm of a woman who can move a crowd without raising her voice. She had become my partner in all of this. Part mentor and part mirror. She handed me a set of hand trowels, their metal faces shining. She said, "The first turn is yours." I knelt and pressed the blade into the soil. It gave easily, like it had been waiting for the touch. The small group gathered, fell quiet as I tucked a lavender start into the earth. I patted the dirt gently around its base and thought of Harold's hand on mine the first time we planted tomatoes behind our rental in Columbus. He had said, "Start small and start true, and let the rest follow." After the ceremony, people drifted to the folding tables where cookies and lemonade waited. A woman I recognized from church came up and told me her mother had watched the news every night for the last week and kept saying that this felt like a second chance for all of them. I did not know how to hold those words. So I thanked her and asked about her garden instead. She laughed and said she could keep mint alive, and that was about it. I said mint was persistence in plant form. And that felt like a blessing for both of us. That evening, I opened Lily's envelope at the kitchen table. There was a drawing of me standing beside a plant with a purple cloud of flowers and a small note in her careful printing. "I am sorry that Mom was unkind. I want to grow up to be brave and kind like you." I pressed the paper to my chest and let myself cry. Not the raw kind, but the soft kind that knows it is safe to fall apart for a minute, because you will be able to put yourself back together again. 2 weeks later, I taught the first class of our financial literacy program at the community center. 12 women sat in a circle with notebooks on their laps. Most were my age or a little older. A few were younger and carried that familiar look of someone who has been told that the rules are not for her. I asked them to write down one thing they were afraid to ask about money. No names. No judgment. We put the cards in a basket and pulled them out one by one. What do I do if my son handles everything, and I do not know the passwords? How do I read a statement without feeling stupid? Who do I trust if I have already trusted the wrong person? I heard my own past in every sentence. I did not pretend to have magic answers. I talked about practical steps and paper trails and the power of a second pair of eyes. I told them that dignity begins with information, and that a question is not a weakness. It is a door. After class, a woman named Ruth stayed behind. She said she had not written a card because her hands were shaking too much. She said her daughter had set up all her bills online, and now she never saw anything. I told her we would meet at the library next week and print every statement for the last 6 months. When she tried to apologize for taking my time, I told her there is no apology in learning to see again. News traveled on its usual routes. The Chronicle ran a small story on the program. The Regional Business Journal wrote a longer piece about the unusual shift of assets into local projects and scholarships. Marcus sent a formal note, saying the bank had completed its culture review, that several managers had been reassigned, that a new training program had launched, and that an outside auditor would verify compliance. He ended by saying he had walked past the garden with his daughter, and it made him think about the kind of legacy he wanted. I pinned that note to the corkboard in my kitchen between grocery lists and Lily's spelling test. Daniel called more often. Short calls at first. He would tell me he had applied for a job at a logistics company and that he did not mind starting at the bottom, that it felt cleaner there. He told me he was going to counseling. Sometimes he would ask if I needed anything. I always told him I had everything I needed. One afternoon, he said he had run into Amanda's sister at the grocery store. She had said Amanda was working with a career counselor and volunteering at an animal shelter. He said he felt strangely relieved, knowing she was busy with something that required soft hands. I told him, soft hands were not a weakness. They were a choice. Summer came in quickly after that. The lavender in the library beds lifted their purple heads and nodded in the afternoon wind. Children read beneath the maple at the far end of the path. The kind of reading that looks like listening. One of the scholarship recipients sent me a letter with a photo of her in a classroom. Chalk on her fingers and pride in her eyes. She wrote that she wanted to be the teacher she wished she had when she was 12. I put the photo by Harold's picture. It looked like a promise kept. On the first day of the second class cycle, a woman brought her mother, who walked slowly with a cane and carried a spiral notebook with a bright blue cover. The daughter said, "This is my mother Louise, and she is the bravest person I know." Louise said she did not feel brave. I told her bravery rarely feels like fireworks. It feels like showing up. In the evenings, I still sat on the porch with a blanket across my lap. Some nights Daniel would stop by on his way home to tell me about the small victories of a job that required honest sweat. Some nights, Lily would bring over a library book and read a chapter aloud while I knitted a row, and then the same row again when I forgot where I was. When the air was very clear, I could see a bright star low in the west, and I liked to pretend that it was a light Harold had left on for me. One Saturday, we held a small open house at the foundation office, which was really just 2 rooms over the old pharmacy, with potted plants in the windows and a coffee maker that took its time. People came in with curiosity and left with pamphlets and a sense that something ordinary but important was happening here. A man stopped at the door on his way out and said that the town felt different lately. Lighter somehow. He asked if I felt it too. I said I did. As the year turned toward fall, the garden glowed with late flowers and the library hosted a harvest reading day. I gave a small talk that mostly thanked volunteers and then wandered off the path for a moment to say a thing I had been thinking for weeks. I said that pulling my money from a bank made a lot of noise, but that the quiet choice to move my attention was the one that changed me. I said I had withdrawn $1 billion. But the more important withdrawal was from a ledger of shame I had been keeping in my head for too long. People nodded. Not because the words were clever, but because they recognized the feeling. After the event, I walked the length of the garden alone. The air smelled like cut grass and sun-warmed soil. I touched the edge of a lavender plant, the one I had planted on the first day, and felt the soft leaves give under my fingers. I thought about the girl I had been, the woman I had become, and the space between the two where I had almost disappeared. I thought about Amanda, not with anger, but with that complicated mixture of sadness and release that comes when you finally put down a heavy thing. I thought about Daniel finding his footing and Lily writing notes with gold stars. When the sun slid low, Charlotte found me near the gate. She said, "Do you realize you have not once asked for permission this whole season?" I laughed and told her I was making up for lost time. She squeezed my hand and said, "Keep going." That night, the house was quiet in that good way it gets when the work of the day has been honest. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote one last entry in the journal I had started when all of this began again. I wrote that dignity is like a garden. It needs tending. It needs boundaries. It needs your hands in the soil. I wrote that I was tired in the best way. The way that meant I had given something of myself and still had more to give tomorrow. Before I turned off the light, I opened the wooden box and looked at Harold's note. The paper was soft at the folds now. Use it when they forget who you are. I touched the letters and felt the steadiness return. The familiar sense that I was exactly where I needed to be. If you have ever been made small because of your age or your quiet or your kindness, tell me your story in the comments so we can hold it together. If this journey meant something to you, stay with me for the next one. And share this with someone who needs a reminder that respect can be reclaimed.